It's Tuesday, August 15, 2017. Our panelists today, James Lomas, a commercial real estate broker and an assistant professor from Alabama A&M with political science, Shannon Reeves. I'm Dale Jackson. You're watching Yellowhammer TV live. Domestic terrorism and a United States Senate race. These are the things we're going to discuss at length today. Let's first go ahead and get to the headlines. Over the weekend, we saw one dead, many injured, fighting, which is completely unacceptable. It's terrorism. I don't think there's any other way to look at it. You look at that photo, you see somebody committing an act of political violence. That's the definition of terrorism. But I would argue this is sort of inevitable. And I think we've been heading down this path for quite some time as Americans on many different sides of many different issues have basically said we are willing to be violent. We are willing to be violent to shut people we disagree with down. We are willing to be violent just to hurt people we don't like. Let's talk to our panelists about this. Shannon, was this inevitable? I mean, were we heading down this path? Was this coming no matter what? And are we definitely going to see more of this?
I don't know if it was inevitable. I think we are at a certain state in the country's history and in our politics where people feel more emboldened to and less tolerant of opposing positions and opposing perspectives. So I think we have to remember, and I think I said this to you this week, that the way I look at it is, if people come for you when you speak, they're going to come for me next. And so even though there are those groups that I disagree with, I feel they have a right to say what they want to say. Now, there are also those groups who oppose, and if they want to have an opposing voice, but it never should be allowed to get to the point where there's violence.
We've watched on college campuses across this country where the idea of a security threat will shut down this event or that event. Texas A&M canceled an event for Richard Spencer, one of the organizers of this alt-right nonsense that took place. They canceled it yesterday and said because of security threats, which basically says if I'm willing to say I'm going to cause a big enough problem, I'll keep someone else from speaking. I think that incentivizes this kind of stuff. James, is it incentivizing violence and chaos to give in to these folks? Is this what the universities and cities and states should be doing?
I don't know necessarily that it incentivizes it all. It may embolden some people, but at the end of the day, this is completely unacceptable. There is the protection of free speech, but violence is not part of free speech, and you don't need to have violence to get your message across. These kind of similar rallies have been going on for years. I mean, they had one that was just as large last year. Obviously, violence didn't break out. And I feel like people in America feel very embattled right now. Everyone feels like there's a deeper undercurrent going on. And it quite frankly is very sickening that people have taken it to the point where they want to act upon this. And they want to fight into these deep, dark urges that they have that they think is right. And really it's not, and it's something that needs to get out of the framework of America because that's not what we're about.
I watch these things take place, and I've seen protests for years, and obviously America is a nation where you have the right to protest, and we see these things happen all over the place. The difference here is everyone is showing up with sticks, shields, and pepper spray, and swinging bike locks, and I mean, you don't show up to an event with a shield and a stick not looking for a fight, and we've been seeing more and more of this all the time. And let's not forget there were also people who rolled into this thing with firearms, and we'll get into a little later how you can prevent some of that. But the sticks in the shields show me that they were coming to fight. Everybody was coming to fight. The left, the right, everyone was coming to fight. The only people that weren't willing, I guess, apparently to start fighting were the cops. I mean, Shannon.
Well, and I feel bad for the people of Charlottesville, because these people were people who came from out of town for the large part, for what it seems, who are not really from that community where this all actually occurred. And there's another problem. I always revert back to, what do we as individuals believe this country really is, and what is this democracy? What is this all about? And when you don't pay attention in civics class, when you don't understand really how the government works, when you don't understand the society that we have, you then believe that your way is the only way, and therefore I'm going to shout down or knock down anyone who has any type of opposing position. That's just not how this country is designed and set up to work.
The shut it down mentality has gained a lot of steam. Shut it down, shut it down, shut it down. I mean, and that's why I think this is inevitable. We'll see more of this.
Well, Dale, I think there's absolutely a difference between free speech and terrorism. And I think you hit the nail on the head. That picture of the car running through the crowd, that's something you'd see in the sands of the Middle East, not in Virginia, in the United States.
Yeah, I completely agree there. Moving on, Donald Trump responds, and let's be real, it was said on MSNBC yesterday, one of the NAACP heads said it didn't matter what Donald Trump said because she wouldn't believe him, which I think is a little bit of accidental honesty on this. That said, in his first statement about this, he did not specifically tick down lists of people that were involved and people that he, quote, denounced. We'll get into his second statement where he did do that in a second, but on his first one, Shannon, was it too weak? Was the first statement too weak? Was there something missing? Was there a failing here by the president, or would it have mattered what he said?
You got to understand you got to understand how this is viewed. It's all about perspective. I've been a Republican for 28 years. The problem with my party is my party lacks credibility on issues of race. So when you have the president's statement was just fine. He denounced hate. He denounced the violence. The problem is, if he were Donald Trump, CEO of the Donald Trump Organization, it was a great statement. But as a Republican political leader, it was not, because there are all types of other policy and engagement questions. My question is, when you write the statement, who that looks like me, what African Americans are in the room when you're addressing an issue of race in the White House, right? And for Republican elected officials, this is constantly a problem. When you engage issues like this, you have all white staff, you have people who don't come from diverse communities, and therefore the perspective of even the statements, there's nobody even behind the scenes to fight and say, this is going to offend a certain percentage of the population, or there's more you should add. And that doesn't happen, and that's why my party continues to have this problem.
You think it was too weak? The first statement was too weak?
I don't think, no, I think it said everything it was supposed to say. But the problem in a political context, which is the context that he operates in as President of the United States, because of the party, the lady said it, whoever that was, she said, well, whatever he said, I don't think I would even believe it. It's a credibility problem consistently. When you don't consistently denounce David Duke and those like that, because there may be 10,000 votes you might be thinking you might offend, it's a problem. You can't have that calculus.
Shannon's saying the optics are bad.
Well, it's just, for the statement was just fine. He said everything that, I mean, if you and I said the same statement, it'll be perfectly fine. But because he's a Republican president, and because of the track record behind it, he won't get credit for it that way.
James, what about you can comment on that if you want, but what about the second statement? Did that check the boxes it needed to check?
The second statement is what he should have said the first time. I think that first statement, yes. I think that was, I absolutely have major issues with that. I think we, you know, I'm a Republican, we on the right for years criticized Barack Obama because he was not strong enough in defending police officers or anything in the Black Lives Matters kind of riots. Trump basically said the same thing Obama did, that on both sides there's problems. And that's exactly what Barack Obama said, and we had an issue with that. We need a president that's going to take a stand. I think that's why people elected Donald Trump, and he needs to do that.
Isn't he right, though? I mean, let's get down to I understand the optics and the politics of it, but this is a both sides issue. I mean, we were just talking about how people showed up with sticks and shields on both sides coming to fight. Later on that night, you had a fight in Seattle. Who were the left fighting in Seattle? They were fighting the cops. I mean, this is legitimately a both sides issue. I mean, I know it's someone on the left died by a guy on the right. So saying both sides, I understand the optics of it, but was he wrong?
I don't think it's on the left or the right. I think that's one of the worst definitions, and that's one of the sad things that's become a narrative in all this of oh, well, the left is just as bad during Black Lives Matters, or this didn't happen when the right, that's such a bad comparison in this. Those people are not on the left and the right. Those people they're racists that you can't define as on the right.
Hold on. The Antifa guys are leftists. The alt-right, by definition, are right-wing guys, even though they're nut jobs and we all denounce and all that stuff.
If you push someone there's too far, things are going to happen, okay? And that's obviously if the white supremacists hadn't showed up and caused this problem,
absolutely,
then it wouldn't have been on both sides.
But you said earlier that they did this a year ago and didn't have these issues. And I think that we've already talked about how it's been ramped up to the point where there's a whole different issue here now. Moving on, in the state of Alabama, I think we've actually got this right. In the state of Alabama, if you go to a protest wearing a mask, and you saw this at Auburn, the cops were standing there when people were coming in, take your mask off, take your mask off, drop your weapon, take your mask off, take your mask off. In Alabama, you can't bring a weapon to one of these things. You can't bring a firearm. You cannot bring a weapon to these events. Do we need something like this nationally? Because the Klan's not wearing the masks anymore. I mean, these alt-right guys, their uniform wasn't hoods and things. They were wearing khakis and polos, okay? The left shows up with masks covering their face. This has been a thing they've been doing for a while. Do we need a federal weapons and masks ban on protests and political actions, and how in the world do you enforce it?
No, I think we get too much government into it. I don't think necessarily. Every state has to make their own determination and decision. Law enforcement need to be able to identify when something goes wrong. So we have masks on. They can't identify because if we look at it, if we had that same law in place and this were in Alabama, the young lady would still be dead because the guy used a car instead of a gun.
See, that's where I disagree. I don't think people behave this way. It's just like the internet. Anonymity breeds cruelness because if you're standing there with a mask on, it's easier for me to hit you with a stick. Or if I have a mask on too, it's easier for me to hit you with a stick because you're not a person.
Well, I'm not saying that correct, but I'm saying the young man that committed the crime used a car and not a gun. So
or
how you gonna ban? You're right, a stick or something like that. But on the mask issue, yes, I think you are more emboldened when you can hide your identity so you can be more mischievous. So I think on that notion, every state has to make its determination.
Maybe I'm digging, James, tell me if I am, but I don't think that the car event takes place if all this other stuff doesn't happen. I don't think this guy rolled in there and said, I'm going to drive a car through a crowd. I don't think that's something you do. I think what he did is he was pissed because he went to his white power party and all these people came and ruined it, so he got mad. And the reason they were able to ruin it is because they rolled in with masks and sticks, and there was a huge fight, and there was battles all over the place. Am I reaching?
Yeah, and it's a terrible image, and a lot of it has to do with, listen, the Constitution gives us freedom of speech and freedom of thought, basically, but being anonymous is not part of that. If you want to say something, go say it. Don't hide behind a mask. It's like you said, it's just like the 15-year-old internet commenters that say bad things about people. It's sad.
Yeah, and I truly, I tend to agree with you, Shannon, that the state should decide. I think Alabama's got this right. You don't see this. This stuff isn't happening. And the reason why I say I think Alabama has it right is we have Confederate monuments all over the place. We have protests happening all over the place. But what you don't have is people beating the crap out of each other with sticks. And at Auburn, they rolled in there with sticks, with shields, to break up a Richard Spencer. Again, third time he's been mentioned in this. They rolled in there with that, and the Auburn police said, you're not going to do it. Now, fights happen. But what happened? You saw the fights, and the cops came in, pulled them apart, arrested people.
Well, you can't. What has to happen is, first of all, if you go back to Virginia, and I know we're kind of Monday morning quarterbacking this thing, but you have to ask, what was the law enforcement strategy? I think, first of all, if there was if law enforcement maybe had better estimations, maybe had a different response, maybe the whole thing doesn't happen. maybe the groups were not even allowed. Where I've been before, there have been protests. The groups weren't even allowed to even come into contact with each other based on the permitting or based on the route.
The cops apparently were told to stand down. John Meredith, who has filled in on this show, been on my radio show numerous times. His father, James Meredith, in Mississippi, shot during the civil rights movement. He made a point yesterday that said basically it's odd because when Black Lives Matter do their things, they'll roll in there with cops and tanks and all sorts of stuff. And here they were just like, sure, fight it out. And they let them fight it out. And I think you're going to see a change in that strategy as well. Let's move on to the state of Alabama. Let's stay in the state of Alabama. Now let's move on to another issue. It almost seems trivial at this point. There is a United States Senate race today in the state of Alabama. Get out there and vote. If you're informed. If you're not informed, please stay home. There's no reason for you to get out there and vote at all. There was a robocall recorded. Strange got the Trump endorsement. We can talk about what that entails. There's a robocall as well. Can this drag Strange over the finish line? He's the incumbent. He's got 20+% of the vote against two guys who are, one really well-known, Roy Moore, one known in North Alabama, Congressman Mo Brooks. But he's still only polling 20%. I mean, they're pulling out all the stops to get him over the finish line, right, James?
Yeah, I mean, I think this robocall, too, is major. I think it obviously depends on who it's going to. I mean, if it's going to the majority of Alabama Republican voters.
Spent on this robocall, that's a lot.
It's pretty major.
Yeah.
If it's going to the majority of the Republican voting houses in the state of Alabama, I think it will make a difference. I think if it's going to your traditional voters that have maybe voted for the past 10 to 15 years, it won't make as much of a difference because I feel like this last election cycle, Trump did bring in a lot of new people that are big-time Trumpers, but necessarily not all-time voters. I think a lot of those people won't necessarily go to the polls unless they have a reason. This may be the reason for them.
This would motivate them. Shannon, what do you think? How big a deal is this?
You don't spend that much money without it working. Yes, absolutely. It's going to have an effect, and it's going to be targeted. The numbers that they called are targeted. They've been testing it. They've had this time during the campaign. It will make a difference. Think of the average person that gets a phone call, and it's the President of the United States voice on the other side. Not only are they going to take the call and be excited about it, they're going to tell other people, guess what? I got a call from the President. And it's my duty now to go forward to do it. They happen. You spend the money because it works.
We're going to talk about who we think is going to win, who's going to make the runoff, all this other stuff. Is this a sign of desperation by the Strange campaign? I mean, they sought this. They got this. Obviously, they all wanted it. Nobody's going to turn down. But we're talking about a big amount of money spent. He's 25%. He is in a dogfight. Still margin of error. Is this desperation, or is this just let's not leave anything on the table? Which is?
Yeah, it's desperation. I mean, it's a must-win scenario. You can't have the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and the Senate-elect Fund and the SREC and the President of the United States all behind you and lose. You cannot. They cannot afford to have one. The Senate is just that tight.
Yeah.
So, no, they're putting all the stops on board. And if it's a runoff, well, it will be a runoff. I would not write off having President Trump put Air Force One down in Alabama for a runoff to push Lucy
Strange makes it desperation on their part, or what?
Well, I don't think it's desperation. I think it'd be incredibly embarrassing after all this if they do end up losing. But I don't think it's desperate at all. You're in the middle of a dogfight, and you need to win. I mean, it's incredibly major. You always want to spend what you've got.
Yep, I completely agree with that as well. All right, when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about this Senate race. Like I said, the election is today. We'll be right back on Yellowhammer TV Live. Welcome back to Yellowhammer TV Live. Let's talk about the United States Senate race. Obviously, the Republican side is getting all of the attention, but I found something interesting. Yesterday, I heard an ad from Bobby Kennedy Jr. on conservative talk radio. Now, I don't think he has a ton of money in order to run these things. He is one of the, I would argue, one of the favorites in the Democratic side. Him and Doug Jones, an attorney, a former U.S. attorney from Birmingham. These are the two Democrats on the top. Bobby Kennedy Jr. targeting conservative talk radio. Yes, name ID I think is interesting because he has that name. but Democrats running on a conservative talk radio station in a primary. Can you explain that to me, Shannon?
No, I can't. Hold on. This is not the Bobby Kennedy Jr.
No.
This is like a black guy. From,
Right. When I met him, I said, you know, I was kind of surprised. I thought you might be Ken. And he goes, "How do you know I'm not?" And I'm like, "Because you're a black guy."
That's right. You're a winning name.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, hey, he's trying to.
Oh, it's a different tact.
Yeah, you know.
It's a different tact. I definitely. Are you surprised?
Sounds like an uneducated candidate to me. I mean,
is that what you take from that?
That's not where you spend your money.
On a Democratic primary, it's definitely.
Can he win the primary against Doug Jones because just no one's paying?
I think he was polling like 50% in Democratic primary because people think he's Robert Kennedy Jr.
By the way, in that poll on the Republican side, Mary Maxwell, the woman from Australia, had 14%. So let's take that poll with it.
Yeah, and I don't think that the Democrats are as fired up to just get out just to be voting. I think it's the people that are going to the polls are going to be the Democrats that are very educated on the race.
Yeah. I think they'll be more excited on the next round. When we get to the general election, I think they'll be fired up. Let's move to the Republican side. That's where the main fight here is. At this point, you have, again, Congressman Mo Brooks, Luther Strange, and Roy Moore in the reverse order. It seems more Strange, Brooks in most of the polls that we've seen, although there's a dogfight there for second. I think everyone expects Moore to get in. How do you think it ends up? James, tell me first how you think it ends up.
Yeah.
I know it's a tough one.
Like you said, it's going to be a dogfight, and I think we referenced just a minute ago of all the stops that the Luther campaign is pulling out. I do think that Senator Strange will end up making that runoff. I think Roy Moore has a very low ceiling, but he's got a very high floor. So I think his numbers are going to actually be a little lower than everyone thinks that they are. I still think that he makes a runoff, but he's not going to be as impressive as the polls are saying.
We got Tripp Pittman polling about 9%, playing major spoiler, I think, on this as well. Everyone else is kind of lost in the shuffle, less than 2% in the most recent polls. How do you think it turns out, Shannon?
I spent many years working for the RNC and working in Washington with these groups, and we had specials like this. They don't play to lose. I don't see there's a way with the resources and with the coverage that Luther Strange does not make the runoff.
Bad weather expected in other parts of the state, not in North Alabama. I think North Alabama is going to turn out big for their congressman, and I think Congressman Mo Brooks is going to limp into the runoff. I think Strange loses. Gigantic embarrassment for Mitch McConnell. That's sort of this notion that Congressman Brooks has taken on over the last couple of weeks. It's the ditch Mitch idea. Does that have any legs to it?
I think it does. I'm personally voting for Congressman Brooks.
I was going to ask you, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the congressman's district. I'm voting for him. I think it's very important that the 5th Congressional District turn out in big numbers for a different point also, but that's for the politics of the state. This part of the state has got to participate and turn out very heavily. I would love to see a runoff with Congressman Brooks and Luther Strange. I'd love to see that runoff.
Okay.
I'd love to see that play out too. Be entertaining. I'm not going to get into that here on live TV.
Yeah. Why would you commentate on who you're voting for?
Yeah, but it is pretty interesting. I think that on the ditch Mitch thing, I think that's absolutely effective. I think that Congressman Brooks is the king of that, of painting a picture of what we're against. In 2010, when he was first being elected to the Congress, he had fire, no honor, no Griffith, and then he had fire Pelosi. I think ditch Mitch is just as effective.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm voting for Brooks. I don't think that comes as any surprise. Congressman Brooks and I have known each other for a long time. He's a friend of mine. I've actually participated. I hosted his telephone town hall yesterday. So I don't think there's any question about where I stand. I think Mo limps into this thing, and I think it becomes Moore and Brooks in the runoff. This, I think, is going to be a big blow to Mitch McConnell, and I think that that's going to be how people are kind of framing this. Again, I predict, just to clarify, I predict that there will be a big turnout in North Alabama. I saw some polling the other day that showed Brooks beating Strange in North Alabama 3-1. And that shouldn't come as any surprise. So if there's a turnout, that's where it's going to be. And so let's go ahead and put a pin in it there. James, you sure you don't want to tell us who you're going to vote for here?
not right here. I mean,
we'll talk about it tomorrow.
Sure.
I'm a political scientist.
We'll do
Okay. All right.
At the end.
Let's take our last time out. We'll be right back and talk about what the biggest story of the day is. back to Yellowhammer TV Live. Let's get into the biggest story of the day. Shannon, what's important to you today?
Dale, you stole my thunder. The biggest story of the day will be the weather in Alabama for today's election. How will it affect southern parts of the state with the actual turnout?
Some people are praying for rain.
Well, hey, some people are just praying all together. So I think that's the big story of the day. How will it affect the actual turnout for today's election?
James, what's the biggest story of the day for you?
Well, I think what's most important to me is what has happened in Charlottesville and how disappointing that all is. And I think one of the major things is viewing the images from these riots is that how many young people were involved in this on both sides, and that's just sickening to me. I mean, I wasn't raised that way. They were my age people out there. You know, bridges are made to be walked across, not burned, and I hope that this is a lesson for all of America.
Yeah, I think that young lady died for nothing, and I think that that is just an absolute, total shame. The biggest story for me today, I'm going to piggyback on what Shannon said. There's an election, and people who watch this and listen to my program, you're the people that can decide this election. You're more informed than almost anybody, so get out there, utilize that brain today, and cast the vote. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about what happens. You're watching Yellowhammer TV Live.